Chapter 41. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. With tears smearing his cheeks, he sobbed silently for those brave warriors under him who had fallen. The howl of the passing wind started making him remember the past, the time where he camped in the wilds with his unit after a successful sabotage against their enemies. They were exposed to the elements, with only the campfire giving them warmth as the wind howls and passes by them. Those were the good old days where he enjoyed the company of his peers. Until their unit was disbanded due to some political issues, their captain charged with insubordination and dismissed dishonorably after disobeying a command. A command that will surely get his men's lives in danger. He still remembered what he angrily yelled on the radio towards the old general. "There is no hell way that I will let my unit be a sacrifice. I'll accept my punishment after this mission, but I will leave no man behind." The captain remained decisive with his stance and took responsibility of everything. During the court-martial was the last time that Xiao Chen saw his captain. He just disappeared like a bubble. Ednel.co. In his past life, he had never experienced losing so many men consecutively. He was a general in rank but never really had the power that came with it. He only had around 100 men under him, and most of them were non-combatant, like those who are in charge of logistics, communications, medical welfare, and many other fields. Xiao Chen accepted everything. He never tried to get more than what was provided for him. He made remedies for those that he doesn't have. In every mission that he had undertaken with his very own unit, they never suffered any real casualty. They only suffered grievous wounds, but they lived, but some unlucky ones needed to be honorably dismissed because of their injuries, like severed limbs. Soldiers come and go in Xiao Chen's own unit, since every single mission that was thrown at them was never an easy one. He took good care of his men, never allowing any of them to be left behind, and just like his captain, he disobeyed many commands. Commands that he deemed excessive and unreasonable, that could put his life and those under him in jeopardy. Luckily, his achievements and merits kept the charges of insubordination against him at bay, unlike his captain who had no such things. Mission after mission, he accomplished them whenever they are possible, and backing out if it was deemed impossible after intense investigation and observation. His leadership career was flawless. All his men remained all accounted for after each mission, despite others being 3/4 or half a man after encountering dangerous situations during their missions. After blaming himself, Xiao Chen wiped away the tears that stained his face. The grieving expression that he had now was replaced by his stoic facade. Gripping his spear tightly, he stood up with his back straightened like the weapon in his hand and walked steadily towards his warriors. "We have counted 103 dead brave warriors," Chief Gurkhan respectfully reported as a scowl emerged on his face, his anger directed to the unending number of goblins that besieged them. "Chief, you might want to take a look at this," Eroshana shouted towards Xiao Chen as he beckoned him towards the little Grogus prying something from the mess-up skull of a goblin that got unluckily squashed. The hands of Grogus were covered in blood and brain matter as he took out something from the squashed goblin head. On his hands was a black crystal that oozed out a foul stench of death and decay, while also having the energy that is commonly felt upon the presence of a demon. "By my ancestors! That's a crystal from the spell of domination from a demon or a warlock!" Sakharin exclaimed as he approached closer to the black crystal that was on Grogus' palm. "There's no mistake, it's from the spell of domination," Sakharin confirmed as he took the black crystal from the goblin and held it towards his nose, sniffing it closely and feeling its texture. "That means we aren't dealing with normal goblins but the pawns of a demon or a warlock," Trothar butted in as he wiped away the blood that covered his face after he tore apart a goblin with his thick and burly arms after foolishly lunging at him, thinking that he wasn't proficient in melee combat. "Yes, these aren't normal goblins. They attack recklessly, unafraid of death unlike normal goblins, and they attack in huge swarms," Sakharin commented as he held the black crystal close to his eye, trying to find any telltale if it was from a demon or a warlock. "What do you say, big guy?" Gurkhan patted Galamnor's butt as the huge orc joined them. Still weak. Just smash and they die," the muscle head replied quickly and just said what came into his mind. Let's hope it's from the latter and not the former, Xiao Chen said as he didn't want to encounter another demon too soon after his experience with the demon of madness, Osh. Fighting against a demon wasn't a pleasant thing to do, especially if you don't have the power to defeat it. He didn't know if the spirit of Guratza would descend on again if he really meets a demon, but one thing is for sure, it won't be pleasant. With the fallen warriors loaded on the wagons, Xiao Chen and the Johann 1st Battalion marched forward towards the place that the scouts deemed sufficient to erect a camp. The goblins thoroughly were sly, they hid from the scouts and fooled the nose of their wargs and only made their move when the main army arrived. Arriving at the chosen camping grounds, the Johann 1st Battalion started digging a ditch around their soon-to-be erected fort. Xiao Chen requested bigger timbers to be used since he wants to make this fort a permanent one unlike the one that they built near the entrance to the woods. A towering over 10 feet tall wooden wall surrounded the campsite with 4 gates that could be closed at any time if there was a sudden attack. Xiao Chen and his troops didn't require the use of torches since they could still see fairly even when it was dark, but with lesser range unlike during the day. Chapter 42 You are listening at novelfull.audio. With a huge bonfire lit in the center of the camp, the fallen warriors neatly arranged in their funeral pyre surrounding the bonfire in a circular fashion. The Johann 1st Battalion neatly lined up before the funeral pyres in full battle gear like they were going to engage in a battle. Those who wielded spears strike the ground with the butt end of their weapon in a slow rhythm, the ones who wielded the stabbing swords banged their shields with it. A slow and lasting blast from the battle horns echoed through the camp as the war drums made their entrance. Slow beats accompanied from the drummers accompanied the melancholic sounds of the weapons that grieved for their fallen peers. As the commanders started setting alight the funeral pyres, the distinct sound of bamboo tubes started resonating. Kulda and his group made some traditional instruments of the Horde by cutting bamboos with different lengths with a sealed end at the bottom. As they strike the ground with the bamboo tubes, it produced a sometimes deep or hollow, long and short sound depending on how they covered the open end of the bamboo tubes with their hands. Sakharin stood in front of the last funeral pyre and stared at the warriors of Johann. Kagare Thok Zorgash. Ziluash Rakam Guber. Kazgara Ak Tradam. He yelled towards the warriors who all had their eyes in him, waiting for what their commander will say as they continued to make sounds with their weapons. It was pure old Orcish, Xiao Chen didn't know how but as time goes on, he is getting more and more familiar with it. These brave warriors have fallen, gone to accompany Thugmukin in his never-ending feast. They are gone but we shall remember their bravery and prowess. If they get denied to Xanadu then we'll screw the gatekeeper till he lets them in. Awoo. Gurkhan suddenly interrupted Sakharin as he slowly moved forward towards where his fellow commander was at. The warriors of Johann enthusiastically replied to his call. The gatekeeper or the watcher of the gates to Xanadu was one of the gods that the orcs hated because of his actions of denying brave warriors to enter. The denied souls linger outside the gates until they were let in or preyed upon the soul devourers that roamed the outside. After 2 days, Xiao Chen was waiting behind the wooden walls for the scouts to return and hoping that they bring no ill news to him. Chief, you might want to see this. Gurkhan suddenly barged into his tent in a hurry, his eyebrows lowered and knit together and eyes blinking rapidly while his hands tightly gripping the hilt of his sword. Lead the way. Xiao Chen's interest got piqued by Gurkhan's behavior and followed after the obviously in a hurry commander of his. Walking briskly, Xiao Chen saw most of the Johann 1st Battalion all geared up and manning the walls while the others quickly moving around towards their designated area. Gurkhan gestured to Xiao Chen to climb up the watchtower. Curious and puzzled he climbed up. Reaching the top of the tower, Xiao Chen saw Trotdar staring far into the distance. Xiao Chen glanced towards where Trotdar was looking at. What came into his sight was a low cloud of dust which can only be from the movement of a massive number of creatures. Straining his eyes as much as he could but to no avail, Xiao Chen gave up and just patiently waited for Trotdar to report to him what he sees. Ugh. Chief, it's our riders, Trotdar hesitatingly reported as he spotted the familiar faces of those in front riding wargs. They were from the Archon clan. Our riders. Xiao Qian stared at Trotdar with confusion, since if it's their riders, then why is there a low cloud dust behind them? What else do you see? Xiao Qian asked as he is still confused on the presence of the dust cloud. He wanted to find out if their riders were being pursued by enemies or not, so that he can give proper commands to his warriors for them to be ready to tackle the incoming danger. One of the leading riders sprinted forward with his mount and broke off from the group approaching the wooden walls. The other riders stopped a good distance away from the walls, out of range from the javelins, just in case someone will mistakenly throw a spear at them. The cloud of dust soon settled, and what greeted Xiao Qian was a very rare sight. Kobolds, goblins, orcs, taurens, ogres and trolls were all part of the same group. Trotdar had his eyes wide open and jaw slightly dropped as he stared at the extremely odd sight that he was witnessing before fear took over as he remembered something. It's Fuker. We come with the survivors of the south. The rider who broke away from the odd group yelled towards the orcs who were manning the walls with weapons and shields at the ready. Confused but curious, Xiao Qian scaled down the watchtower with haste and jumped off the ladder when he was halfway down. An almost 30 feet fall was something that could kill or injure an orc, even if he lands on his feet. Rolling forward to dissipate the force of impact upon his legs, Xiao Qian stood up like nothing happened as Gurkhan and the other nearby orcs gawked at the feat that he just did. Dusting away the dirt that got on his arms and shaking his head side to side to get rid of the dirt that made its way to his long wild hair when he rolled on the ground, Xiao Qian proceeded towards the gates of the fort. Open the gates. Xiao Qian commanded, and slowly the crude wooden gate opened like the jaws of a beast with sharp spikes scattered on its sides, making anyone hesitant to ram it open. As Xiao Qian walked outside the protection of the walls, a group of warriors wielding spears and shields accompanied him along with Sakharin and Gurkhan. What do you mean survivors? Xiao Qian quickly questioned as he stood 10 feet away from the rider while his warriors stood in front of him at the ready, wary of the rider in front of them. By the chieftain's side on the left was Gurkhan with his weapon unsheathed, while Sakharin riding Black Wind remained alert, observing what is going to happen. Chapter 43. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The lone rider dismounted from his warg, patted his mount, then saluted towards the chieftain. We come with the survivors of the south, chief. Xiao Qian was deeply puzzled by the rider mentioning the term survivor and curiously proceeded closer towards the scout he had sent out, his wary warrior standing at attention as he signaled them that everything is all right. What do you mean by survivors? Xiao Qian asked and glanced towards the massive horde at the distance, which was made of mixed races. I think it's better if you hear it from the dwellers of the south, chief. The rider bowed his head and looked behind him towards the creatures which he said to be the survivors. Fear was deeply etched among the faces of the survivors as they looked towards Xiao Qian and the wooden fortification behind him with hope. For days they have been pursued by the pawns of the demon, sometimes even their own kin who had fallen victim to the demon's spell. The season of damnation comes and goes without warning to the occupants of the south. It arrives with no warning at all till it already began. Call the representative of each of the races to explain the details to me, but the others shall remain outside the walls for the meantime, until I can get a clear vision of what is going on. Xiao Qian commanded the rider in front of him, then turned back and retreated towards the safety of walls. Are you sure it is wise to let them within the walls, chief? Sakharin ushered Black Wind beside the chieftain and questioned him. If they make even a single suspicious act, I'll kill them all. Gurkhan butted in and caressed the sword in his hands, his eyes blazing with loyalty. The loyal orc walked beside their chieftain, keeping at the same pace as him. We'll need information on what is truly happening. We are not from this part of the Orcish lands and we are basically blind on what is occurring. I need a clear glimpse of this phenomenon to come up with a plan, Xiao Qian said while walking briskly towards his tent. Behind him were some warriors who took the initiative in ensuring his safety. Morios, that's what I'm called. Greetings to you, chieftain. A huge minotaur stepped forward and made a small bow. Morios was bigger than the muscle-head Galamnor. He had yellowish-brown skin color, with sparse hair covering some of his big body. The horn on top of his head was totally similar to that of a bull. My kind are the ones who roamed this part of the lands the longest before our neighbors arrived except for those small underground and cave dwellers, Morio said as he glanced at the leader of the kobolds before moving his gaze towards the representative of the other races. The phenomenon that we are experiencing now is the season of damnation which happens every now and then here in the south. It begins whenever a demon descends on this plane and putting the creatures that it encounters in a spell. Those that fall victim to its spells become no different than a wild beast, preying and slaughtering on anyone that doesn't radiate the same energy as them. We the Taurans are sensitive to this energy and we migrate north whenever it happens, but this new demon seemed to know of our routes and ambushed us on our way north, blocking all paths. Morios explained as the leaders of the other races nodded their heads in agreement. Every time that the season of damnation arrives, they forego all hatred between them and moved north. They prioritized their survival first before their old hatreds. So, you mean to say that the routes to the north are all blocked by the pawns of this demon? Xiao Chen wanted to be sure of the situation. Yes, young chief. All the paths to the north are filled with its pawns waiting in ambush, even the hidden paths are filled with them, Morios continued. Decam like plague, Mon. To kill everything on the path, the representative of the trolls butted in, which made Xiao Chen speechless. The fuck with that accent, he thought. Xiao Chen got a clear idea of what was going on, but instead of being serious, he couldn't help but laugh because of the way the troll spoke. Why you laughin', Mon? Dis ain't funny business. The troll felt offended somehow when the young chieftain laughed towards them. He didn't know why, but he felt that he was the one that made the orc laugh. Xiao Chen tried hard to contain his laugh, but some audible chuckles still came out from his mouth and his face started to turn gray as he was having a hard time to breathe, trying to prevent himself from outright laughing hard. Apologies, Mon. Just can't help meself, just remembered something me, Mon, Xiao Chen replied, copying the way that the troll spoke. The troll stared at the orc chieftain, his pupils starting to enlarge as his jaw dropped. You brother of the trolls, Mon? The troll curiously asked, since orcs were known to copulate with other humanoid species, especially the males. They breed with any other race as long as they deem it necessary to strengthen their tribe. They had no problems with their offspring since they inherit most of their looks from their orc parents. No. I am fully an orc, Xiao Chen said while shaking his head, cutting the conversation short as he had more things to deal with than explaining to the troll. One by one the representatives of the other races also told accounts of what they knew about what Morios called the season of damnation. They call it in different ways, but the thing that is similar is about a demon descending and enslaving the creatures that it sees with a spell and sending them out on a path of destruction and slaughter. The demon disappears after its demonic energy gets depleted, since this is not its home, or if it gets killed by a brave one. Chapter 44. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What do you think, Chief? Sakharin stared at Xiao Chen, had a very serious look on his face. He was unresponsive, which prompted Sakharin to patiently wait for a reply. If this demon sends its minions on a rampage, the village won't be safe, Xiao Chen muttered as he spread a scroll containing a detailed map of the surroundings. The location of the village was clearly marked on the map, along with it was the path they took, the previous location of the Galuks and the forest, including the 2 forts that they have erected. If they blocked all routes to the north, most likely, they lay in ambush along the foot of Tkarr mountains. Xiao Chen strokes his chin and thinking of what can he do to ensure the safety of his tribe. Sakharin was ignored, but he wasn't offended. Whenever the chieftain is lost in his thoughts, everything no longer matters as long as he isn't in danger. Right. The kobolds are excellent miners, right? Xiao Chen glanced at Sakharin, who was now scratching the fur of Black Wind, petting her head to make up for the times that she ignored her. The kobolds are truly excellent miners, Chief. They tunnel underground in search of precious ores and stone. They had knack for finding such things. Cave and tunnels, that's where they dwell, most of the time. Sakharin explained to the chieftain. Sakharin didn't know what the chieftain was planning, but he had a feeling that it is something important and maybe odd, like the way he trained his warriors. Relay my command, let the survivors of the south take a rest and distribute some of our food supplies to them. The next dawn, we'll return to the village, and also better to tear down this fort. The minions of that demon might make a use of it as a gathering point to launch attacks towards us. Xiao Chen ordered, bringing out a stack of blank scrolls from a wooden chest and started drawing something on it using the map in front of him as a basis. Sakharin knew well that the chief was going to be busy with whatever he was doing and not to be disturbed unless necessary. Sakharin busied himself with relaying commands to the others and also took initiative in giving commands that he deemed necessary. Glancing towards the direction of the chief, Sakharin saw the chieftain returning inside his tent with a stack of scrolls on his hand. Xiao Chen busied himself in creating a rough outline of a defensive wall around the village. The outline covered more ground than the previous wooden walls. Since he had great miners to utilize, he can search for raw materials from deep in the undergrounds or the ones hidden within the mountains. Xiao Chen was planning to introduce new technologies to this world, but first he had to make a detailed plan of them. According to Morios and the other representatives, the season of damnation only ravages the south. The Taurans felt a strong energy within the Tikrr mountains that drives off the minions of the demon and serves as natural barrier for the north. Many of them had tried to seek the source of that energy, but none ever returned after venturing deep into the woods of the mountain. BDNVLDM trolls, ogres, orcs, goblins, kobolds and taurans had tried but none succeeded in finding the source of that energy, they all just vanished. It became a paradise for animals and beasts alike since no one can survive within it except for them. Deep into the night, Xiao Chen rested but within his mind, he was still busy thinking of the details of his plans. Sakharin entered the chieftain's tent and saw him staring on a scroll in front of him filled with scribbles that he can't understand. Beside the scroll that was laid in front of the chief was a thick stack of scrolls that Sakharin didn't want to peek on. The one in front of the chieftain was already making him dizzy with all the messy lines and scribbles on it that he couldn't understand. The warriors are ready to move, Chief. Sakharin announced his presence after shaking the things he saw from the chieftain's work out of his head. Right, get Kulda and his group to take care of these things. And also, better to let the kobolds ride on the empty wagons. Xiao Chen spoke as he started putting the piles of scrolls on the wooden chest beside his makeshift table. They are basically almost blind during the day because they are accustomed to living in dark places in tunnels and caves. We'll go on full steps march and they will slow us down if they walked on their own two legs. Xiao Chen explained as Sakharin stared at him with a puzzled look on his face. He went on a stroll last night and found the kobolds still widely awake, moving about inside the camp. They were curiously staring and touching things around the camp, they sometimes even licked and nibbled on the equipments of his warriors which made him look at them strangely. He chatted with them for a bit and found out about their weakness against light. They lived in the dark most of their lives and their eyes became very sensitive to light. He was also reassured by the kobolds that anything that he wants hidden underground or on the mountains, they can find it as long as he gives them a description or a sample of it. The physical features of the kobolds intrigued Xiao Chen. They look like a miniature dragon minus the fire-breathing part. Standing barely 3 feet tall on average, with scaled skin between reddish-brown and black in color and burnt orange to red eyes. Their legs were sinewy and digitigrade. They had long, clawed fingers and a jaw like a crocodile. Small white or tan horns protruded from their head, and they had rat-dot-like tails. They had the smell of wet dog and stagnant water. They said that they were descendants of dragons who were cursed and became as small as they are now. Chapter 45. You are listening at novelfull.audio. With the beat of the war drums and a long blast from the battle horn, the Johann 1st Battalion started their march back home, and along with them were their new friends. Chants like they were replying against each other echoed after one another as they go on their march. With their shields resting lazily on their left, they marched at the same pace, keeping a good distance from each box formation. The other races stared in awe at the display of unity and discipline of the warriors of Johann. Even the humans to the west and to the south were less disciplined than the orcs that they are witnessing. High from above, a long serpentine of different races marched towards the village of Johann. The orcs of the other tribes had a look of pride on their faces as they watched their kin on the move. The Johann 1st Battalion marched with pride as they go, chest out, broad shoulders raised and with spines as straight as a spear, unlike their other brethren who had their shoulders droop low and marched sloppily in a messy rhythm. Almost 2 weeks of continuous march, Xiao Chen with his army and their new friends arrived at the village of Johann. The survivors gawked at the sight that they were witnessing. They suspected that it was a human settlement instead of an orc because of the things that they saw, like the farmland to the north and the tall well-made wooden walls. Archon and Galuk orcs continued on their daily business after acknowledging the presence of their chieftain and the disciplined army behind him. Rakashta was the one at the helm who managed the village while Xiao Chen and the others were gone, but he was more focused on the strange things that the chieftain introduced to him, the wonders of the modern era. Xiao Chen assembled all his orcs and informed them all with the looming threat from the east, the minions of the demon that are on a path of destruction and slaughter. We need to work together in order to survive. No matter what race you belong. Let go of old hatreds. After rallying everyone towards one goal, Xiao Chen distributed labors to the races. The kobolds and goblins in mining for ores and other useful materials. The ogres and orcs armed with huge hammers to work as stonemasons, who had no qualms about it due to their innate strength. The trolls, well, the trolls were great woodworkers, and anything that has something to do with wood and nature, they are the experts. Morios and his race became the transporters of almost everything. They were twice or thrice more powerful than the beast of burden in moving things around. Their thick and huge frames were ideal for it since they rejected Xiao Chen's suggestion of them partaking in tearing down parts of the mountain. Morios said that they won't participate in destroying nature's gift and risk invoking the wrath of Mother Nature. Everybody, no matter the race and age, they all sweated and worked for their survival. They didn't know what the young chieftain was up to, but they had no other choice but to trust in him. Every single day, they poured sweat and gathered what was required of them. What are you planning to do with all the boulders, Chief? Sakharin finally can't endure his curiosity and approached the chieftain, who was at it again, busy scribbling some messy lines and wordings on a scroll that he can't understand. We're going to build a city wall. Xiao Chen proudly replied, looked up to Sakharin as he leaned and stretched his aching spine a bit, then stared at the scroll in front of him a bit, making sure that everything is correct before continuing on. Forgive me for my rudeness, Chief, but that is nonsense. The Pink-Skins spent years after years in building their city walls before being completed, and us, who knows how much time we have left before the pawns of that damn demon descends upon us. Sakharin uttered, his tone filled with anger and displeasure while eyeing the chieftain. This is madness. I entrusted my clan to you to honor my father's words, and in hopes of redeeming our former glory, you had earned my respect and gratitude the past months, but now I am starting to doubt whether trusting you was a mistake. The displeased orc expressed his emotions, his worry for his clan, the burdens and shame that they must cleanse. Did I ever make any irrational decisions? Did I make you do things that are worthless? Did I let the sacrifices of my kin be in vain? Xiao Chen stood up and faced the displeased orc in front of him, muttering everything, word per word, loudly and clearly. The burden that was on his shoulders, it was very heavy. It was too heavy that he felt being suffocated by it, the decisions that he had to make, the plans that he had to come up with, the lives that he had to protect. Bluish silver light blazed upon Xiao Chen's eyes as his anger flared. He was receiving the most pressure as he is the one at the helm, a single mistake and they will all be sent to the afterlife. Sakharin stared at the eyes of the chieftain, the bluish silver light in his eyes made him finally realize the blunder that he had done. Noel.N. Apologies, my chieftain. I am just worried that my clan will end in my hands. I'll accept any punishment that you will mete out, but just spare my clansmen and continue to lead them. Sakharin kneeled down in front of the chieftain, with his blade laid in front of him. He was prepared to receive his punishment, and he knew the retribution for his blunder was death. Rise and pick your blade. I have more use of you alive than dead. Redeem your clan by your own hands, that is your responsibility to your clan and not mine. Remember this, no matter how impossible things are. If there is a will, there is a way. An orc's will must be tougher than iron. Engrave that in your mind. Shao Chen lectured. Sakharin then sat down and continued on his work. The bluish-silver haze that was on his eyes faded. Only Sakharin and the one peeking inside the chieftain's tent witnessed the sudden change on Shao Chen's eyes. Chapter 46. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Turning around to make his exit, Sakharin was greeted with the grinning face of Gurkhan peeking through the slightly raised flaps of the chieftain's tent. Sakharin was confused a bit but got over it quickly because of irritation from the grin of Gurkhan. After exiting the chieftain's tent, Sakharin spread his gaze around and found everybody still busy doing what the chief had assigned them to do. Heh, glad you still got your head attached to your body. Gurkhan joked and chuckled a bit towards the confused orc in front of him who just had an earful from the chieftain. What do you mean by that? Sakharin knitted his brows together in confusion and stared at Gurkhan, seeking for an explanation. You haven't seen the chieftain's real prowess in combat yet. Whenever his eyes glow in color, he goes on a rampage and can do much destruction, much more than what the muscle-head Galamnor could. Gurkhan stopped a bit and remembered how their chieftain single-handedly decimated thousands upon thousands of the goblin minions of the demon alone. The chieftain's each swing made the air vibrate as gusts of winds that wounded enemies from a distance. That blood-red haze that covered his eyes that time made him look like a demon that just crawled out from the depths of Gehenna. Remembering how the chieftain was like during that time made Gurkhan feel goosebumps all over his body till now. He was like the avatar of death and destruction himself, slaughtering any enemy without a shed of mercy nor compassion. Dismembering each enemy to small pieces and sometimes even burning them to ash with greenish flame that radiated out of his right hand. Sakharin's forehead was covered with sweat. He sweated more and more as Gurkhan continued to tell him about the power that the chieftain wielded. He can't help but feel lucky that the chieftain spared him and didn't exact any sort of punishment. Now you know why I said that I'm glad that your head is still attached to your body. Gurkhan snorted towards Sakharin, then turned around and walked away. Sakharin stood there like a log for some time in deep thoughts, glancing towards the chieftain's tent. He can't help but shake his head. Wait for me. Sakharin yelled towards Gurkhan, who was getting further and further away. Clipping his blade on his side with his right hand, he chased after him. Seems like I am still in luck. But damn, my ears hurt from the chieftain's lecture. Kind of reminds me of the nights we spent together with what the chieftain called commander's classes. You deserve such an earful. Rule number 1. Never question the chieftain if you don't fully understand him or his ideas. Better seek counsel from Rakashta if you aren't sure, since he is the only one among us who somehow understands the chieftain's odd ideas and even implemented some of it. Gurkhan snorted at him. The kobolds and goblins finally reached a good depth in tunneling through the mountains and started branching out towards many tunnels in search for metal ores and other precious things hidden within the mountains. The orcs and ogres seemed to be having a contest in who can make more stone blocks than the other as they chipped the huge boulders, turning them into rectangular-shaped blocks. We'll need to make it bigger, move your asses, or I'll mix some nasty concoctions on your meals. Rakash the bellowed towards the orcs who were with him, about 100 of them, mostly forgers who had knowledge about furnaces. On his hands was a scroll containing the blueprint of what looks like a huge prison cell with no windows except for 2 entrances, one bigger than the other. The chieftain gave him the blueprint and explained the details about it. The structure was to be used to produce the thing which he called cement, which was crucial in building the city wall that they needed. The chieftain said that they can create a tall and long wall with the thing he called a cement that can be as durable as the walls made by the pinkskins. Rakashta was the only one interested in the odd ideas of the chieftain due to his curious nature. The ideas of the chief fascinated him and made him wonder if such things are really possible. Pile the fire bricks tightly and neatly or the heat will escape through those gaps. He shouted as he saw some small gaps between the fire bricks. What's the use of creating such a huge furnace? One of the workers approached Rakashta after unloading the new batch of fire bricks that just arrived. It's a cement maker and not for forging metal, Rakashta shortly replied and yelled towards the orc workers who were slacking off. Cement. What's that exactly? The orc worker can't help but ask and wanted to know more about it. Chief says it's like a clay but binds things together stronger. It is an important material for building durable structures. If you want more details, you better start studying under the chieftain since I am still but just an apprentice of his odd ideas, Rakashta explained then shouted again. He was getting irritated by the working pace of the orcs. Put your backs onto it. Enough slacking. Xiao Chen went out his tent to get some breather and also to inspect on the progress of his plans. He saw the Taurens moving about carrying on their shoulders huge loads of ores, metal ores from the mines, and the others carried, pushed or pulled some boulders towards where the orcs and ogres were contesting on who makes more stone blocks. Breathing in fresh air then exhaled slowly, Xiao Chen walked around the village. He was watched as the Johan 1st Battalion joined the physical labor in the building of the city wall. In their hands were digging tools instead of a shield and a weapon. They were digging the foundation for the city wall that he planned. The foundation for the wall looks like a long straight ditch which was commonly made by the pink skins as a defensive measure in their battle lines to protect their fragile units against night raids. Chapter 47 You are listening at novelfull.audio. The crackling sound of wood being burnt disturbed the silence of the night. The brightness produced by the lit fire chased away the darkness in its immediate vicinity and warded off the chilly winds of the mountains. Staring up towards the dark sky which is littered with numerous twinkling spots, Xiao Chen silently observed the shining gems of the night. After inspecting the progress on his grand plan of building a city wall, Xiao Chen was lost in his own thoughts and climbed up the mountain behind the village. He camped on a nearby cliff with a great look of the village and its immediate surroundings. From where he stood, he could make rough outline on where the wall will be erected at basing on the long ditch that the Johan 1st Battalion dug. The slowly rising structure made almost entirely of fire bricks or the raw materials for the cement were to be blasted up with intense heat. The noisy pounding of the mountain walls to the north by the orcs and ogres as they tear boulders off from the mountain. The long serpentine line of Taurens moving around with their heavy loads. Xiao Chen even met some trolls on his way up the mountain with the things that they foraged around the woods of the mountain, be it raw materials or food. He just nodded at them and continued in his ascent to the mountain till he found where he was at now. There you are, Chief. Gurkhan emerged from the darkness while panting and his forehead covered in sweat shined with the help of the light from the campfire. Gurkhan went around the camp trying to find the chieftain but he saw not even a shadow of him. Asking around the village, he finally learned about the chieftain's location when he stumbled upon the trolls who saw the chieftain going up the mountain. What's the matter? Xiao Chen glanced towards Gurkhan who had his hands on his knees and his back arched forward trying to catch his breath. The kobolds. They discovered a huge body of water underground which looks like a lake and it seemed to extend towards the lands of the pink skins to the west, Gurkhan reported in between deep breaths as he was still trying to stabilize his breathing. The kobolds were really industrious workers, they worked in rotation continuously and only needed a few hours of sleep to rest. They only take breaks when it's time to eat then return to digging tunnels again. With the goblins aiding them, they didn't need to get out of the dark tunnels. The goblins were the ones who carried the things they mined outside while they continue on in carving paths deep underground in darkness. An underground lake. Did they try searching around it? Where does it leads to? Xiao Chen's curiosity was triggered and he was also alarmed. That place might be possible attacking point that the humans would utilize to attack them. He chose the location of the village due to its advantageous natural barriers but with the discovery of the underground lake, the safety of the village would be at risk. Ugh. No, Chief, They haven't tried to venture too far from the shore due to wariness of what might be lurking somewhere in the water. Gherkin sat down beside Xiao Chen as he extended his hands towards the campfire where the skewered meat was being roasted. It seemed that Gherkin made use of a unique scent of the prime beef being roasted to locate him. Ignoring Gherkin, Xiao Chen started thinking. If there is such a huge body of water underground, they might be able to make use of it as an entry to the lands to their west and nab some resources from the control of the humans and also to explore and discover this new world that he was now in. An hour close to midnight, Xiao Chen descended from the mountains with Gherkin in tows, who was busy nibbling on the roasted skewered prime beef meat on his hands. It seemed that he was truly enjoying his time. Xiao Chen saw the patrols on duty doing their rounds in the village and nodded towards them before proceeding to inside his own tent and to his warm bed. The next morning, Xiao Chen told the kobolds to tunnel away from the lake for the meantime till they solved the current problem that was on their hands. They had to deal with the incoming minions of the demon that swarmed the south first before exploring the newly discovered underground body of water. Getting a close eye of the gravel cast-offs of the kobolds while mining, he finally saw a huge number of the ash-gray colored cast-offs that he was looking for, which he tasked the kobolds to specially look for besides the metal ores, mostly iron. There was a huge pile of the ash-gray cast-offs which was separated properly from the rest. He finally had his first raw material in making cement. The ash-gray cast-offs contained plenty of calcium carbonate which could be used as limestone when they are grounded. Requesting Morios and the rest of the Taurans to prioritize moving the first raw material for the cement, Xiao Chen thanked the kobolds for their efforts before returning back to the village. Xiao Chen selected some of the bored warriors of Johan to accompany him in grinding the mining cast-offs into dust. For many days they grinded them to dust and gathered plenty of them. Mixing the grinded material with clay that underwent plenty of washing to purify it, the actual production of cement was finally start. Some small amount of gypsum was added to the mix which the kobolds accidentally discovered while tunneling nearby the underground lake. The result was an ash-colored wet paste which was then mixed thoroughly in an iron container before being brought inside the fire brick structure. "You ready?" Xiao Chen asked the Archon shaman who was tasked in blasting the materials with intense heat. "I hope your odd idea works, Chief," the Archon shaman said as he started calling on the power of the spirits. "Jierum Sakare Dakar Arsigan." The shaman muttered and intense heat started emerging within the kiln. A ball of fire emerged out of thin air just above the slimy paste that was laid on top of the fire bricks that make up the floor of the kiln. Like a beating heart, the ball of fire started pulsating and the heat that it emitted started getting hotter and hotter, that even with the fire bricks containing it, Xiao Chen could still feel the intense heat that it emitted. Chapter 48. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xiao Chen really wanted to see the process closely, but the heat produced by the ball of fire was too intense and unbearable for him. Rakashtha tried approaching the kiln, but the intense heat was driving him away. They just watch as the pulsing ball of fire kept on emitting heat until it finally disappeared like a bubble that was popped. "Apologies, Chief. I can no longer sustain the fire spirit," the Archon shaman muttered as he used his wooden staff for support. He was drained of spiritual energy, his forehead covered with sweat and his breathing ragged. Xiao Chen nodded as an acknowledgement towards the shaman and approached the kiln where there were ash-colored clumps scattered. He wanted to feel it in his hands, but the residual heat was still unbearable and waited for it to cool down. A few hours of waiting and Xiao Chen finally had some of the ash-colored clumps in his hands. He pinched them with his fingers and it shattered into fine powder, easily blown by the winds. "Is this what you wanted, Chief?" Rakashtha approached the chieftain as he stared at the materials. "Looks like it. But we'll need to test it first to be sure that it is what we needed," Xiao Chen replied as he dusted his hands off the residue of the material. "Will this bind the stone blocks together, more tightly than clay can?" A worker orc questioned the chieftain. He can't imagine the fine powder to bind anything together. "It has plenty of uses, not just for the walls, it can also build other structures like houses, roads, and bridges. It will shatter most common knowledges about structures that we knew of, giving orders to the orc workers nearby to ground the clump materials together to fine powder and put them in a container. Xiao Chen hoped it was what he wanted. He mixed the test cement with some river sand that was piled up by torrents under his request. Xiao Chen then added water and mixed it up thoroughly. He took 2 leftover fire bricks and applied the resulting paste in between them. Did it work, Chief? Rakashta excitedly asked, as he was more interested in it than anyone else. We'll find out tomorrow, Xiao Chen replied as he set the bricks on a suitable spot near the kiln. The next morning, Xiao Chen hurried to the fire brick structure and what greeted him made him knit his brows together. All his commanders were there. They were all just waiting for him to unravel whether or not the test was successful. Looking at the 2 bricks, the cement appeared solid already, and the bricks seemed tightly stuck with each other. He touched the cement and sure enough, it had solidified overnight. Now for the actual test, Xiao Chen grabbed each brick in his hands and tried separating them with all his strength. His muscles bulged as veins started emerging on his arms and neck. He was exerting all he can but the 2 bricks remained stuck together. Tossing the stuck bricks towards the muscle head, Galamnor, Xiao Chen, told him to separate them. Galamnor tried his best in trying to separate the bricks but to no avail. Irritated by his failure, he slammed the bricks hard on the ground. Under the surprised look of everyone, only the fire brick got damaged as one of it broke into 2, but the part that was attached by the cement remained firmly stuck together. So, this is the effect of the so-called cement, Sakharin muttered and stared at the chieftain. Amazement was apparent on his face. This is simply incredible. Yesterday it was as soft as clay but just in one night it became as strong as a rock. With this, the city wall that the chief spoke of would be totally possible. We can build a wall quickly with this. Ha! We can now build walls faster than pink skins, Rakashta exclaimed as he picked up the bricks on his hand, slowly feeling the solidified cement on his hands. Not just walls, we can also build magnificent houses with it that can rival the ones built by the pinkskins. We can make our own castles as grand or grander than them, Xiao Chen smiled. The test was a success and with it, the orcs will now leap from being tribal society into a city. Real production of the cement went into rapid development. The Archon shaman took turns with the troll sages in blasting the raw materials with intense heat. The troll sages volunteered as soon as they have learned that the chieftain was looking for anyone capable of using fire in their magic arts. Hotter the fire, the better. The Archon shaman sighed in relief as there were 4 troll sages who were proficient in fire arts, but they had to work in 2s to produce enough heat for the materials to be done. The time they did it alone, it was a failure as the produced cement was subpar and didn't work as the chieftain wanted. The orc forgers started forging long and thick iron rods as chieftain requested. When the real production of the cement started, the chief said that it would reinforce the durability of the structure. They forged very long iron rods which were twice and thrice bigger than the iron spears that they were previously tasked to make. Day after day, the village was busy in producing the materials for the city wall. Xiao Chen was no engineer, but he had knowledge of building defensive structures during his years as a soldier. The trenches and defensive walls that they built during the wars that he took part in, the walls that saved them from many enemies that lurked in the shadows. On the blueprint of the city wall, there is a pillar every 10 meters of the wall which will be purely made of concrete and the iron rods, making the wall more durable and resilient to impact. Chapter 49. You are listening at novelfull.audio. With all the materials gathered together, the building of the city wall finally started. Xiao Chen assigned Rakashta to supervise its construction since he was the only who understood his blueprints and his idea of the wall. He had other things to take care of, like the current weapon blueprints in his hand. Orcs don't use bows because they guaranteed that every time that they draw the string, the bow snaps in half because they applied too much force. Xiao Chen designed a repeating crossbow for them, no need to pull manually the string back. He designed it after a shotgun which has an underhand cocking mechanism instead of the regular overhand or side lever on almost all crossbows. The repeating crossbow combined the actions of spanning the bow, placing the bolt, and shooting into a one-handed movement, thus allowing for a much higher rate of fire than a normal crossbow which he was accustomed to, the beauty of continuous fire albeit only for just 6 shots before loading additional bolts onto the magazine. A top-mounted magazine containing a reservoir of bolts was included in the design, fed the crossbow through gravity, a rectangular lever attached to both the tiller and the magazine, and a tiller mounting the prods with a stock. The design was basically a shotgun without the use of gunpowder. The magazine on top of the main body of the crossbow can only accommodate an additional 5 more bolts on it without including the bolt that was already cocked in and ready to be fired with just the squeeze of the trigger. There were 2 variants of Xiao Chen's shotgun-based repeating crossbow, one that fires solid iron bolts which could penetrate through enemies and armors, and the other one fires metal spherical pellets which could take down unarmored foes. The trolls and the orc forgers worked together in bringing Xiao Chen's idea to life. The trolls did the woodwork on it, while the forgers dealt with its metal frame for it to be durable. Xiao Chen took part in the weapon's creation by ensuring that the mechanism behind it was correct, or else they risk hurting the wielder. The next day, a prototype of the new weapon was ready to be tested, one for each variant of the weapon. Picking up the bolt-shooting variant, Xiao Chen felt its similarity to a shotgun of modern times, albeit heavier and bulkier. Carefully loading a few iron bolts onto its magazine, which were made of 2 wood pieces that were aligned parallel with each other. The bolts were placed in between the wood pieces and held in place by a metal lock, which prevents the bolts from being loaded into the firing chamber unless the weapon was cocked. Xiao Chen gripped the cocking mechanism of the weapon and pulled it backwards, then forward. The first bolt was then ready to be fired with just the squeeze of a trigger. Loading the extra bolt, Xiao then turned around and sighted the targets that were placed at different distances. The first one was 10 meters away, which was easily punctured by the bolt, the next one 30 meters and it still was a success. Fourth one was 50 meters, which was still punctured by the bolt but didn't go through it unlike the first 2 targets. The last one, which was 100 meters away, Xiao Chen squeezed the trigger after cocking it, then fired the bolt with great accuracy, hitting the target. The 1-foot-long bolt penetrated the target with almost half of its length through the target. The weapon's capability impressed Xiao Chen, but he wanted it to pack more power and gain more range. Aiming at the target 120 meters away, it was still a hit, but only a few inches of the bolt went through. With the last bolt, Xiao Che fired towards the foot of the tall watchtower, which was more than 150 meters away from where Trotler lived in for the past days and keeping an eye out for any sign of the enemies. The bolt hit the target but just bounced off of it after creating a small chip on the wooden target. It needs more power, add more strength to the string and increase the size of the limbs but not too much or it will be impossible to be used. Xiao Chen commented as he put the weapon down and picked up the pellet firing variant of it. Unlike the one that fires iron bolts, this one was more complicated and harder to be made with it, firing a pellet forward straight. The weapon's magazine worked in the same way as its twin but held more ammos in it, containing 12 lead pellets including the one loaded into the chamber. Taking aim and firing, the pellet went through the first target thoroughly and made a bigger hole than the one that ejects bolts. Xiao Chen judged the damage to be extremely lethal. He carried on with the test and found out that the pellet firing variation only had a maximum of 50 meters range of effectivity. Is there any way to increase its power output? Xiao Chen asked the trolls and orc forgers, to which they shook their heads. It's impossible, Chief. If we increase the power behind it then it will be the chamber that will be ejected and not the pellet. This one is more complex and inflexible in its design unless we could find something to push the pellet forward. Zul'jin reported his findings on the weapon. They tried adding more power to the pellet firing one but to no avail, it was all a failure. The bolt firing kind was easier since it works much just like a bow which the trolls had knowledge of but the one that fires pellets. Only the chief knows the exact details about it. We could make bigger ones of both kinds, but they can't be wielded by our warriors in combat easily as these and with some modifications. We could use them for defending or during sieges on enemy settlement. Zul'jin suggested. He witnessed the massive damages by such humongous weapons. This will do. We use the bolts for foes who are armored and further away, while this one for something up close and personal, and the bigger ones that you spoke of, they will suffice as siege weapons. Xiao Qin grinned and loaded it again with the lead pellets, cocking it back and firing the weapon while moving forward. It shredded the wooden target that he was hitting to pieces as he got closer and closer to it while shooting. I wouldn't want to be at the receiving end of such weapon. One troll exclaimed as they stared at the weapon in Xiao Chen's hands and the target that was torn to pieces that littered the ground. Chapter 50. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The wall finally took shape. Huge pillars made of cement, small stones from mines mixed with sand, and the long and thick iron rods were finally being slowly erected. They finally put the lumber that Xiao Chen requested from the trolls to use. It puzzled the trolls at first on why the timber must be turned into lumber, and now they are finally witnessing its use. They needed them to shape the pillars into perfect box shapes that pointed up towards the sky. They properly lay the foundation for the walls down as it got filled first with rocks and pounded by the torrents with thick timber pillars. Squeeze the rocks together tightly. They then lay the iron rods down, which were crisscrossed with each other, held together by simple metal wires before being poured over with the concrete mix and left to dry for days. It took more than 5 weeks with everybody working together to complete the wall. A full kilometer by kilometer solid wall surrounded the village with a gateway leading to the mountains, one towards the stone quarry to the north and 4 facing east where the minions of the demon would come from. They then fixed the gateways with thick solid wooden walls nailed together and reinforced by iron binders that clamped the thick lumbers together tightly. The 4 gateways didn't have such humongous doors, instead they remained open, but in each entry point had 100-meter long walls on both sides in the villages inside. Xiao Chen designed them to become choke points for the enemies. Their foes would surely go for the 4 open passages instead of the towering resilient 30 feet in height solid walls. The shotgun crossbows would then pepper their foes with iron bolts and lead pellets while his warriors hold the line and prevent them from gaining real entry to the village. The other races, except the goblins and kobolds who are in the mines, would then help in the village's defense, positioned right behind the Johann 1st Battalion to clean up any enemies that got through his warriors. They lay everything out. Xiao Chen was then awaiting the execution of his grand plan and felt thankful that the minions of the demon hadn't located their village yet. He was worried that they might assault them while they were constructing the wall. The next day, a scout that Xiao Chen has sent out returned bearing news of a goblin army a few days to march away from the village. The scout reported that there were 10,000 of them or maybe more. It also included hobgoblins in the enemy army. Xiao Chen smiled as he opened his mission tab. His mission had long been on hold and he hoped that the targets in his mission would deliver themselves to him. Xiao Chen assembled everybody during dusk for the kobolds to take part in without feeling uncomfortable because of the light. There they stood, mixed races stared at Xiao Chen. He saw the expectant look in their eyes, the eyes full of hope, but the one that really caught his attention were the eyes of his own warriors. The orc warriors had a look of excitement in their eyes. Apparently, they hunger for blood and excitement once again after spending many weeks without battle, and some suffered the aftereffects of the demonic curse that plagued them. Everything is in place. We have prepared a plenty. The only thing that is missing are our enemies. The targets for our new toys. Xiao Chen chuckled. The trolls and the orc forgers then joined him. They were the ones who knew of the damage that those toys could do, and it isn't pretty. The warriors of Johann had mischievous grins on their faces at the mentioning of the new toys. They have tested and practiced with it and they totally loved it. Some of them even whined when they weren't chosen to fire those bad boys when their foes attacks. Xiao Chen even tasked the forgers to craft some special shields for the occasion, shields fully made of solid iron which were aligned with spikes. Now we wait. Rest a bit and hope that our foes would arrive in time before we are bored, Shao Chen continued as laughter reverberated among his warriors, which were then joined by the other races. The ogres and taurens requested to be part of the defense, which caused Sakharin and Gurkhan to be busy for the past few days, teachings and drilling them. Those who didn't pass the required discipline were left out and served as auxiliary units or helpers. They specifically crafted equipment to tailor their immense frames, which only Galamnor could come close to. Helmets for the heads and chainmail for the torso, a much bigger shield and weapons. The ogres favored blunt weapons over blades, which is why they are armed with maces with an iron head accompanied by spikes. The taurens didn't want to wield shields, which is why they are covered from head to toe with solid iron plate armor, and their favored weapon was huge double-handed axes, but Shao Chen equipped them with halberds. Shao Chen dismissed them after and a feast followed. They celebrated the completion of the walls and their success in completing it in such a short time. Chants, songs and musical instruments were then introduced when the bitter ale finally took hold of them. They dance around a huge bonfire that they made, singing and dancing, just enjoying their time after such a continuous week of hard labor. All the races celebrated together and have foregone their old hatreds with each other under the leadership of Shao Chen. It was a rare sight which only occurred during their exodus from their old world. They united as one in massive hordes of mixed races, battling the creatures of destruction that fed on their world. But after arriving in this new world, the old hatreds ignited and war broke out among them. The taurens were the only ones who didn't exist back in their old world, but they had the four-legged ones, the centaurs.